Every morning the city woke up to the sound of cars honking, people rushing to catch buses and shopkeepers opening their stores. Among all this chaos there was a young woman who had her own routine. She would wake up early, get ready for work, and stop by the small cafe on the corner of 5th Street to grab her usual cup of coffee. This young woman wasn't anyone special, just an ordinary person living an ordinary life. But one day, something happened that changed everything about her daily routine. It was a chilly Tuesday morning when she first noticed him. Sitting near the edge of the park, just outside the cafe, was a man in a wheelchair. His clothes were old and worn out, and his face looked tired, like he hadn't slept well in days. He had deep lines on his forehead and piercing blue eyes that seemed to stare into space. The young woman couldn't help but notice how lonely he looked. At first, she didn't think much of it. People passed by him without even glancing in his direction as if he were invisible. But for some reason, his presence stuck in her mind. Later that day, while sipping her coffee at her desk, she kept thinking about him. What's his story? She wondered. Was he always homeless? Did someone abandon him? Or did life throw him so many curveballs that he ended up here? These questions swirled around in her head, but she brushed them off, thinking, why should I care? I have my own problems. But the next morning, when she went to the cafe again, he was still there. And the morning after that, too. Each time, he sat quietly, clutching a thin blanket around his shoulders, looking lost in thought. Something inside her tugged at her heartstrings. Finally, one rainy morning, she decided to do something. Not because she felt sorry for him, but because she couldn't ignore the feeling anymore. She bought an extra bagel from the cafe and poured hot tea into a disposable thermos. Then, with trembling hands, she walked over to him. Her heart raced as she approached. What if he got angry? What if he rejected her offer? She pushed those thoughts aside and said softly, "Excuse me, I thought you might need this." The man looked up, startled. For a moment, they locked eyes, and she saw something flicker in his gaze. Gratitude, maybe, or surprise. Without saying anything, he reached out and took the food and drink from her. His fingers were rough and cold, and his grip was weak, but he managed to hold on to them. "Thank you," he mumbled, barely loud enough for her to hear. That simple act of kindness became a turning point, not just for him, but for her too. From that day forward, she made it a habit to bring him something to eat every morning. Sometimes it was a sandwich, other times it was fruit or a warm pastry. It wasn't much, but it was something, and each time he accepted it with a quiet, "Thank you." At first, their conversations were almost non-existent. She'd ask how he was doing, and he'd nod or give short answers like fine or okay. But over time, they started talking more. She learned that his name was Jacob, and he had been living on the streets for years. He rarely shared details about his past, but whenever he spoke, his voice carried a heaviness that hinted at pain, buried deep within. For her part, she began looking forward to these moments. Her mornings weren't just about getting through traffic or checking emails anymore. They were about seeing Jacob, hearing his voice and knowing that she was making a difference, however small. Even though their worlds couldn't have been more different, there was a connection forming between them. It wasn't based on pity or obligation. It was genuine, real, and human. As weeks turned into months, she found herself wondering why she cared so much. Sure, helping others felt good, but this was different. There was something about Jacob that intrigued her. Maybe it was the way he carried himself despite his struggles, or the sadness in his eyes that told a story she couldn't quite understand yet. Whatever it was, it kept drawing her back to him, day after day. Unbeknownst to her, Jacob was also beginning to change. He had spent years believing that no one cared about him, that he was invisible to the world. But this young woman kept showing up, rain or shine, with food and a smile. Slowly, he started to let his guard down. He realized that she wasn't just another passerby trying to ease her guilt by tossing him a few coins. She truly cared. And that realization opened a door he thought had been closed forever. The door to hope. Little did either of them know. Their bond was only beginning. In the months to come, secrets would be revealed, lives would be transformed, and both of them would discover the incredible power of compassion. But for now, they were simply two strangers brought together by a simple act of kindness, a bagel and a cup of tea on a rainy Tuesday morning. As the weeks rolled on, their morning meetings became more than just a quick exchange of food and gratitude. At first, it was still awkward. She would hand him something to eat. He'd say, "Thank you," and that would be it. But over time, small talk started creeping in. She'd ask how his night was or if he needed anything specific. He'd give short answers at first, but soon she noticed he was trying harder to engage. One crisp morning, as autumn leaves swirled around them, she decided to break the ice a little more. "Do you mind if I sit down for a minute?" she asked, gesturing to the bench next to him. He hesitated for a moment, then nodded. She sat carefully, making sure not to crowd him. For a while, they just sat there in silence, watching people hurry past. Finally, she broke the quiet. "You know, I've been wondering, why do you always sit here? Is there something special about this spot?" He chuckled softly, surprising her. It was the first time she'd heard him laugh. "Not really," he said. "I guess it's just familiar now. Been coming here for years. People don't bother me much, and it's close enough to the shelter when I need to go." She nodded, absorbing his words. Then after a pause, she asked another question. "What about before all this? What was your life like before, well, before things got tough?" The smile faded from his face, and for a second she thought she'd crossed a line. But instead of shutting down, he sighed deeply and began talking. Slowly, haltingly, he shared bits and pieces of his past. He told her how he used to have a job once, a good one too. He worked long hours, climbed the ladder, and made decent money. But somewhere along the way, things fell apart. His marriage crumbled. His health took a nosedive, and before he knew it, he was alone, with nothing to hold on to. "It's funny," he said, staring at the ground. "When you're up there, living your best life, you never think it can all disappear overnight. But it does. And when it does, you find out real quick who's really there for you." His voice cracked slightly, and he stopped, clearing his throat. She could see the pain etched on his face, raw and unfiltered. She didn't interrupt him. Instead, she listened, letting him speak without judgment. When he finished, she simply said, "That must have been really hard. I can't even imagine going through something like that." He shrugged. "It is what it is. I messed up a lot of things myself. Can't blame anyone else for where I am now." Her heart sank hearing him talk like that. It was clear he carried a heavy burden of guilt, blaming himself for everything that had gone wrong. She wanted to tell him it wasn't entirely his fault, that sometimes life just throws curveballs no matter how prepared you are. But she knew better than to argue. So instead she changed the subject, asking lighter questions to ease the tension. Over time, these conversations became a regular part of their mornings. Some days he'd open up more. Other days he'd retreat into himself. But every single day she showed up. Rain or shine, busy schedule or not, she made sure to bring him something to eat. And slowly, trust began to build between them. One chilly morning, as winter approached, she handed him a warm thermos of soup. "Here," she said with a smile. "Thought you might like something hot today." He accepted it gratefully, wrapping his hands around the thermos to soak in its warmth. After taking a sip, he looked at her and said, "You know, most people wouldn't bother with someone like me. They walk by, pretend I'm invisible. But you keep coming back. Why?" The question caught her off guard. She hadn't expected him to ask that. Truthfully, she wasn't entirely sure herself. All she knew was that helping him felt right, like it was something she was meant to do. Taking a deep breath, she replied, "Because everyone deserves kindness, no matter who they are or what they've been through." Her words hung in the air between them, simple yet powerful. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he nodded slowly, his expression softening. "You're wasting your kindness on me," he muttered. I'm not worth it. She shook her head firmly. Don't say that. You're worth just as much as anyone else. Don't let anyone, including yourself, tell you otherwise. Her response seemed to hit home. He didn't argue, but she could see the wheels turning in his mind. Maybe he didn't believe her yet, but the seed had been planted. As the months went by, their bond grew stronger. She started sharing parts of her own life with him, opening up about her struggles and fears. He listened intently, offering advice when she asked for it. In return, he continued to share glimpses of his past, revealing layers of himself he hadn't shown anyone in years. Their connection was unique, not because of any grand gestures, but because of the honesty and vulnerability they allowed each other to see. Through it all, she couldn't help but notice subtle changes in him. He seemed less guarded, more willing to engage with the world around him. Occasionally he'd crack a joke or smile genuinely, and those moments filled her with hope. She realized that while she had set out simply to feed him, she had inadvertently given him something far greater, a reminder that he mattered. But despite the progress, there were still moments of doubt, for both of them. On particularly cold mornings when the wind cut through their clothes and the city felt colder than ever, she wondered if she was truly making a difference. Was feeding him enough? Could she do more? Meanwhile, he wrestled with his own demons, questioning whether he deserved the kindness she offered or if he was destined to remain stuck in his current situation forever. Unbeknownst to either of them, the answer to those questions was closer than they thought. One frosty morning, as snow dusted the ground and the park lay eerily quiet, he surprised her with a confession that would change everything. Winter had fully settled in by now, wrapping the city in a blanket of gray skies and biting winds. The mornings were darker, the air colder, and the park where they met each day felt emptier than usual. People hurried past, bundled up in thick coats, trying to escape the chill as quickly as possible. But for her, these frosty mornings had become sacred. They weren't just about handing over food anymore. They were about connection, understanding, and the quiet strength that grew between two people who might otherwise never have crossed paths. One particularly bitter morning, she arrived with a thermos of hot cocoa and a warm muffin. Her fingers tingled from the cold despite her gloves, and she could see her breath forming little clouds in the icy air. As she approached him, she noticed he looked even more tired than usual. His face was pale, his shoulders hunched against the wind, and there was a heaviness in his eyes that made her heart ache. She handed him the thermos and the muffin, but instead of immediately eating or drinking, he held them tightly, staring at the ground. "You okay?" she asked gently, sitting down beside him on the bench. He hesitated, then nodded slowly. Yeah, I'm fine." But his voice wavered, betraying the lie. She tilted her head, studying him. "You don't seem fine. What's going on?" For a long moment he didn't respond. He just stared ahead, watching the empty swings sway slightly in the breeze. Then, without warning, he spoke. Not loudly, but with an intensity that startled her. "I've been thinking a lot lately," he began, his voice low and shaky, "about everything, about my life, about how I ended up here. And I realized something. I haven't been honest with you." Her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "You've always been honest with me." "No," he said firmly, shaking his head. "Not completely. There are things I haven't told you, things I've kept hidden because I wasn't sure if you'd still look at me the same way after hearing them." Her stomach tightened. She didn't know what to expect. Was he in trouble? Had he done something terrible? For a split second, fear flickered through her mind, but she pushed it aside. Whatever it was, she reminded herself, everyone has a story. Everyone carries scars. So she took a deep breath and said, "Hey, whatever it is, you can tell me. No judgment, remember?" He glanced at her, searching her face for any sign of doubt. Finding none, he exhaled sharply and leaned back against the bench, closing his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, his gaze was steady, though sadness lingered in his expression. Before all this, he said, gesturing vaguely to his surroundings, I wasn't who you think I am. I wasn't some poor guy who fell on hard times. I was rich, really rich. I owned businesses, houses, cars, you name it. I had everything money could buy. She blinked, caught off guard. This revelation was completely unexpected. Rich? Him? She struggled to reconcile the image of the man sitting before her with someone who once lived a life of luxury. But she stayed silent, letting him continue. But being rich doesn't mean you're happy, he went on bitterly. In fact, it ruined me. I got so caught up in making more and more money that I forgot about what really mattered. Family, friends, doing the right thing. My wife left me because I was never there for her. My kids stopped talking to me because I only cared about work, and then his voice cracked and he paused, swallowing hard. And then what? She prompted softly. And then I screwed up big time, he admitted, his hands trembling around the thermos. I got involved in shady deals, cut corners, lied to people. Eventually, it all came crashing down. My business collapsed, my reputation was destroyed, and I lost everything. Not long after that, I got into a car accident. That's when I ended up in this wheelchair. The weight of his words hung heavy in the air. She sat motionless, absorbing every detail. It was clear this confession had taken a lot out of him. He looked drained, like reliving those memories had sapped the last bit of energy he had. She wanted to say something, anything to comfort him, but she knew better than to interrupt. Instead, she waited until he was ready to speak again. After a few moments, he continued, his voice quieter now, almost a whisper. After the accident, no one came to help me. Not my family, not my so-called friends. They all disappeared. I tried to pick myself up, but I couldn't. I felt like I deserved this, like I'd brought it on myself. So I gave up. I stopped fighting, stopped caring, and that's how I ended up here. Tears welled up in her eyes as she listened. She couldn't imagine carrying that kind of guilt, that sense of worthlessness. Yet here he was, sharing his darkest secrets with her, trusting her enough to bear witness to his pain. When he finally fell silent, she reached out and placed a hand on his arm. Thank you for telling me, she said sincerely. That must have been incredibly hard. He shrugged, avoiding her gaze. Maybe. But I needed to. I needed you to know the truth about me. Because maybe you'll understand why I feel like I don't deserve your kindness. Her grip tightened slightly on his arm. Listen to me, she said firmly. None of that matters. None of it defines who you are today. What matters is that you're still here, still fighting, even if it doesn't feel like it sometimes. You're not the person you used to be. You're stronger than that. He looked at her then, surprise flickering across his face. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the distant chirping of birds and the rustling of leaves, stirred by the wind. Finally, he let out a shaky laugh, shaking his head. You're something else, you know that? He said half-jokingly. Most people would have run the other way after hearing all that. Well, good thing I'm not most people, she replied with a small smile. Besides, we already established that I waste my kindness on hopeless cases. This time, his laugh was genuine, echoing softly in the cold morning air. It was a small victory, but it meant the world to her. Over the next few days, their conversations shifted. Now that he had opened up about his past, he seemed lighter somehow, less burdened by the secrets he'd carried for so long. He started talking more about his dreams, not the ones he'd had when he was wealthy, but new ones. Dreams of rebuilding his life, reconnecting with his children, finding purpose again. She encouraged him every step of the way, reminding him that change was possible, even after everything he'd been through. But while she supported him, she also began to reflect on her own life. Helping him had awakened something inside her, a desire to make a bigger impact, to reach beyond the confines of her ordinary routine. She started researching organizations that helped people experiencing homelessness, looking for ways to get involved. Little did she know this newfound passion would soon lead to opportunities she hadn't anticipated. Meanwhile, winter began to loosen its grip, giving way to the first hints of spring. The snow melted, revealing patches of green grass beneath. Birds returned to the park, filling the mornings with cheerful songs. And as the seasons changed, so too did their lives, slowly, steadily, and together. As the days grew longer and the frost gave way to soft spring breezes, their bond deepened in ways neither of them had anticipated. The man who once saw himself as invisible began to feel seen, not just by her, but by the world around him. And she, who had started this journey thinking it was about feeding someone in need, realized that her actions were creating ripples far beyond what she could have imagined. One sunny morning, as they sat together on the bench, he turned to her with a thoughtful expression. "You've done so much for me," he said quietly. "More than you know, but I can't keep taking without giving back. There has to be something I can do." She raised an eyebrow, surprised. "What are you talking about? You don't owe me anything." "I'm not saying I owe you," he replied firmly. "I'm saying I want to help others too. Maybe I can make up for some of the mistakes I made before." His words struck a chord within her. She had always believed that everyone deserves a second chance, but hearing him say those words so earnestly, so determinedly, was powerful. It showed her that he wasn't just surviving anymore. He was starting to dream again. "Well," she said after a moment, "if you're serious about helping others, there are places nearby where people like you, people who've been through tough times, can volunteer, like the community center downtown. They offer meals, clothes, and even counseling services to folks who need support." He nodded slowly, considering her suggestion. "Do you think they'd take someone like me?" "Absolutely," she said without hesitation. "They'd probably love having you. You understand what these people are going through because you've lived it yourself. That kind of insight is priceless." The next day, she took him to the community center. At first he was hesitant, unsure if he belonged there or if anyone would trust him given his past. But the staff welcomed him warmly, eager to hear his story and learn how he could contribute. Over time he found his place among them. He started small, helping serve meals, organizing donations. But soon he began sharing his experiences, during group discussions offering advice and encouragement to those struggling to find hope. Seeing him step into this new role filled her with pride. He wasn't the same person who had sat silently on that park bench months ago. He was healing, growing, and finding purpose again. And while she continued to bring him food every morning, their conversations shifted. Now, instead of focusing solely on survival, they talked about goals, dreams, and the future. But even as he rebuilt his life, she couldn't ignore the changes happening within herself. Spending time with him had opened her eyes to the harsh realities faced by so many people who live on the margins of society. She began volunteering at the same community center, assisting with outreach programs and fundraising efforts. What started as a simple act of kindness had evolved into a passion, a calling to make a difference in the lives of others. Their partnership became a source of inspiration for those around them. Other volunteers noticed how their friendship transcended differences in background and circumstance. They weren't just two individuals helping each other. They were proof that compassion knows no boundaries. Together, they demonstrated that empathy and understanding can break down walls and create connections that last a lifetime. Still, the road ahead wasn't easy. There were setbacks for both of them. Some days, he struggled with feelings of guilt and inadequacy, wondering if he'd ever truly deserve forgiveness for his past mistakes. On those days, she reminded him of how far he'd come and encouraged him to focus on the present rather than dwell on what he couldn't change. For her part, she faced challenges of her own. Balancing work, volunteering, and personal commitments left her exhausted at times. Doubts crept in, making her question whether she was doing enough. Was handing out sandwiches and organizing fundraisers really making a dent in the bigger picture? Could one person's efforts truly matter in the face of such widespread hardship? On one particularly overwhelming afternoon, she confided in him about her frustrations. "Sometimes I wonder if all of this is worth it," she admitted. There's so much suffering in the world, how can we possibly fix it? He listened patiently, then smiled softly. We can't fix everything, he said, but we can start somewhere. Every meal we serve, every person we talk to, every act of kindness, it adds up. You've already changed my life, isn't that proof enough? His words stayed with her long after their conversation ended. He was right. Change didn't happen overnight, and it certainly didn't come from grand gestures. It came from consistency, patience, and believing in the power of small actions. With renewed determination, she threw herself back into her work, knowing that even the tiniest spark could ignite a fire. Spring turned into summer, bringing warmer days and brighter skies. The park where they first met blossomed with flowers and greenery, a stark contrast to the bleakness of the previous winter. One morning, as they sat under the shade of a tree, he looked at her and said, "You should meet my daughter." Her eyes widened in surprise. "Your daughter? Does that mean—" He nodded, smiling. "Yeah, we've been talking lately. She reached out after hearing about the work I've been doing at the center. It's still early, but I think we're on the right track." Tears welled up in her eyes as she hugged him tightly. "That's amazing. I'm so proud of you." He chuckled, patting her shoulder awkwardly. "Don't get all mushy on me now." She laughed, wiping her tears away. Too late. In that moment, surrounded by the beauty of nature and the warmth of their friendship, they both knew they were exactly where they were meant to be. Their journey was far from over, but they had come so far already. From a lonely man sitting on a park bench to a woman unsure of her place in the world, they had transformed each other's lives in ways neither could have predicted. And yet, their story was only beginning. As the seasons continued to change, so too would their paths, leading them toward new challenges, discoveries, and opportunities to spread kindness wherever they went. By the time autumn rolled around again, the bond between them had grown into something neither of them could have imagined when they first met. The vibrant colors of fall painted the park in shades of red, orange, and gold, mirroring the transformation happening in both their lives. He was no longer just a man sitting alone on a bench. He had become an active member of the community, someone who inspired others with his resilience and determination. And she wasn't just the woman who brought him food anymore. She had found her purpose, dedicating herself to helping those in need while continuing to support him every step of the way. One crisp morning, as golden leaves swirled around their feet, he showed up at their usual meeting spot with a small package wrapped in brown paper. His hands trembled slightly as he held it out to her. "Here," he said gruffly, avoiding her gaze. "This is for you." She blinked in surprise, taking the package from him. It was light but carefully wrapped, tied with a piece of string. "What's this?" she asked, tilting her head curiously. "Just open it," he muttered, shifting uncomfortably in his wheelchair. Carefully, unwrapping the gift, she revealed a framed photograph inside. It was a picture of the two of them together, taken during one of their early mornings in the park. She remembered the day vividly. It had been sunny, and she'd snapped the photo on her phone without thinking much of it. But now, looking at the image captured forever in that frame, she felt a lump rise in her throat. On the back of the frame, he had written a short message. "To the person who reminded me I'm still human. Thank you for seeing me." Her eyes filled with tears as she looked up at him. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he replied quickly, his cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "I just wanted you to know how much you've meant to me. You saved me, not just by feeding me, but by showing me that I'm worth something. That's not something I'll ever forget." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sounds of the park, the rustling leaves, distant laughter, and chirping birds filled the silence. Finally, she hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "But you didn't need saving. You did all the hard work. Yourself. I just gave you a little push." He shook his head, his voice thick with emotion. "No. Without you, I wouldn't be here. None of this would have happened." They sat there for a while, letting the weight of his words sink in. For her, the gift wasn't just a token of gratitude. It was proof that kindness matters. Even the smallest acts can plant seeds of hope in someone's life. And for him, giving her the framed photo was more than just saying thank you. It was acknowledging how far he'd come because of her belief in him. As the days passed, their relationship continued to evolve. Their morning meetings became less about survival and more about celebration. They talked about their dreams, shared stories of progress, and laughed over silly things like bad jokes or funny memories. She told him about her plans to leave her corporate job and focus full-time on advocacy work, helping people experiencing homelessness and raising awareness about mental health. To her surprise, he encouraged her wholeheartedly. "You're wasting your talent stuck behind a desk," he said one morning, sipping coffee from the thermos she'd brought him. "You were born to do this, to make people see what you see. The world needs more people like you." His confidence in her boosted her own self-belief. Leaving a stable job to pursue a passion was scary, but knowing she had his support made the decision easier. Meanwhile, he continued to thrive at the community center, earning the trust and respect of everyone around him. His daughter visited him regularly now, slowly rebuilding their fractured relationship. Each time they spent time together, he grew lighter, freer, as if years of guilt and shame were finally lifting off his shoulders. But even as their individual journeys progressed, they remained connected by the invisible thread of friendship that had formed between them. They weren't just two people whose paths had crossed, they were partners in healing, united by shared experiences and mutual growth. Together, they proved that compassion isn't a one-way street. It flows back and forth, touching everyone involved. One chilly afternoon, as winter approached once again, she invited him to speak at an event hosted by a local nonprofit organization. The event aimed to raise funds and awareness for programs supporting homeless individuals. At first, he hesitated, unsure if he was ready to share his story publicly. Public speaking terrified him, and he worried about being judged or misunderstood. "I don't think I can do it," he admitted, fidgeting nervously with his hands. "What if I mess it up? What if people don't care?" She placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You won't mess it up. Your story is powerful, and people will listen because it's real. Besides," she added with a smile, "you won't be alone. I'll be right there with you." With her encouragement, he agreed to give it a try. When the night of the event arrived, the room buzzed with energy. Dozens of people gathered to hear speeches, watch performances, and learn about the cause. As he wheeled himself onto the stage, the audience fell silent. Nervously gripping the microphone, he began to speak. "At first glance, my life might seem like a tragedy," he started, his voice shaky but steady. "I lost everything, my family, my health, my dignity. For years I believed I deserved to be forgotten, that I was worthless. But then, someone showed me otherwise. Someone reminded me that no matter how low you fall, you're still human. You still matter." As he spoke, his voice grew stronger, more confident. He shared his struggles, his mistakes, and his journey toward redemption. By the end of his speech, the entire room erupted in applause, moved by his honesty and courage. Tears streamed down her face as she watched him bow his head humbly, accepting the standing ovation. Afterward, dozens of attendees approached him, thanking him for sharing his story and expressing admiration for his strength. Some even opened up about their own hardships, seeking advice or simply wanting to connect. Watching him interact with these strangers, offering comfort and encouragement, filled her with immense pride. He had transformed from a man who thought he was invisible into someone who inspired others to believe in themselves. That night marked a turning point for both of them. For him, it solidified his role as an advocate and leader within the community. For her, it reinforced her decision to dedicate her life to helping others. Together, they realized that their partnership wasn't just about changing each other's lives. It was about creating a ripple effect, inspiring countless others to embrace empathy, understanding, and second chances. As they left the venue, together, bundled up against the cold, she looked at him and smiled. "See? I told you people would care." He grinned back, shaking his head in disbelief. Yeah, don't rub it in." They laughed, the sound echoing softly in the quiet night air. Though their paths would continue to diverge in the months ahead, their connection remained unbreakable. A testament to the transformative power of kindness, trust, and unconditional support. And so, what began as a simple act of feeding a stranger evolved into a lifelong mission to change the world, one person at a time. Years passed, and life carried on for both of them in ways they could never have predicted when they first met. The seasons cycled through their rhythms: spring blooms, summer heat, autumn leaves, and winter frost. But the bond they shared remained constant, like a steady flame that refused to flicker out. Though their daily routines changed and their paths diverged in many ways, the impact they had on each other continued to shape their lives. She eventually left her corporate job, trading spreadsheets and meetings for a new kind of work, one driven by passion rather than paychecks. Her days became filled with planning fundraisers, organizing outreach programs, and speaking at events about homelessness and mental health. She poured her heart into every project, determined to make a difference in the lives of people who often felt invisible to the rest of the world. But even as she grew busier, she never forgot where it all began, with a man sitting on a park bench in a simple act of kindness. As for him, he found his footing in a way he hadn't thought possible. The community center became his second home, a place where he not only received support but also gave back. He mentored others who were struggling, sharing his story and offering guidance without judgment. His daughter, once estranged, slowly rebuilt their relationship. They started small, phone calls here, coffee dates there, but over time, trust returned and love blossomed again. It wasn't perfect. Old wounds took time to heal. But every hug, every laugh, every shared memory was proof that healing was possible. One day, years after their initial meeting, she received an invitation in the mail. It was from him, a handwritten note inviting her to attend a special ceremony. Curious and excited, she marked the date on her calendar and showed up at the designated location, which turned out to be the same community center where they'd spent so many hours volunteering together. When she arrived, she was greeted by a crowd of familiar faces, staff members, volunteers, and people whose lives had been touched by the center's work. And then she saw him sitting near the front, looking nervous but proud. As she approached, he smiled wide and waved her over. "What's going on?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. "I'll tell you in a minute," he replied cryptically. "Just wait." The ceremony began shortly after, and it didn't take long for her to figure out why she'd been invited. The event was a recognition program honoring individuals who had made significant contributions to the center's mission. One by one, names were called, awards were handed out, and heartfelt speeches were given. Then came his turn. "Next, we honor someone who has truly transformed our community," the director announced, stepping aside to let him roll his wheelchair to the podium. The room erupted in applause as he adjusted the microphone and cleared his throat. "I never thought I'd stand or sit here today," he began, his voice steady despite the nerves evident in his eyes. "A few years ago, I was lost. I believed I didn't deserve help, let alone a second chance, but then someone proved me wrong. Someone reminded me that kindness isn't wasted on anyone, no matter how broken they feel." He paused, scanning the crowd until his gaze landed on her. "That person is here today, and I owe her everything. Without her belief in me, I wouldn't be standing or sitting here, accepting this award. So thank you for seeing me when no one else did." Tears welled up in her eyes as the audience turned to look at her, clapping loudly. She stood frozen for a moment, overwhelmed by emotion, before walking up to join him on stage. When she reached him, he held out a plaque engraved with words of gratitude and achievement. "This is yours too," he said softly, pressing it into her hands. "You saved me, and now I'm paying it forward. That's what you taught me, to give back, to care, to believe in people." She hugged him tightly, unable to hold back the tears any longer. "You did this yourself," she whispered. "I just gave you a little nudge." He shook his head, smiling through his own tears. "No, you lit a fire in me, and that fire keeps burning." After the ceremony, they sat together outside, watching the sun set behind the city skyline. The air was cool, carrying hints of fall, and the park was alive with the sounds of children playing and birds chirping. For a while, neither of them spoke, content to simply enjoy the moment. Finally, she broke the silence. "Do you remember that first morning, when I brought you a bagel and tea?" He chuckled, nodding. "How could I forget? I thought you were crazy showing up like that. Who brings food to a stranger in the park?" "Well, turns out that crazy decision changed both our lives," she said with a grin. "It sure did," he agreed. "And not just ours. Think about all the people we've helped along the way, all the lives we've touched because of that one small act." They sat quietly, for a moment, reflecting on how far they'd come. From strangers brought together by circumstance to partners in a mission bigger than themselves, their journey was a testament to the power of compassion. They weren't extraordinary people. They were ordinary, flawed, human. But in choosing to see each other, to care when it would have been easier to walk away, they sparked a chain reaction of hope and healing that rippled outward, touching countless lives. As the stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, she looked at him and smiled. "We're not done yet, you know. There's still so much more to do." He nodded, his expression serious but hopeful. "Yeah, I know. But as long as we keep believing in people, even when they don't believe in themselves, we'll keep making a difference." And so their story continued, not as two separate individuals, but as a team united by a shared purpose. Together, they inspired others to embrace empathy, to challenge stereotypes, and to recognize the inherent worth in every human being. Their legacy wasn't built on grand gestures or heroic feats. It was woven from countless moments of kindness, understanding, and connection. Because sometimes all it takes is a warm meal, a listening ear, and the courage to see someone when the world has turned its back.